Today's podcast is brought to you by Funny Bone Broth, now available at Italy and McEwen's in the TD Center. Or you can visit them at funnybonebroth.com.
In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos podcast. I'm your host, Ben Grant. Happy New Year, Argos fans. I promise you 2020 will be more interesting than 2019 in terms of the Toronto Argonauts. I'm not going to guarantee it'll be better, although it would stand to reason that 2020 will be a better season than 2019. It's hard to get much worse, but I will guarantee it's going to be more interesting, more exciting. I'm really excited about some of the changes that have been made to this point, and so I'm more optimistic than usual as we approach the 2020 season. Today's podcast is going to focus on some of the additions that have been made. Obviously, we're not in the free agent period yet, and we're going to focus on the offensive side of the ball. Next time, we'll do defense and special teams. I can't believe how many guys the Argos have brought in to this point. Not only the number of guys, but just loading up on running backs and receivers. And either they have in their minds they're going to make just wholesale changes at entire position groups, or they're really looking hard, way more so than usual, for that one specific guy that is going to take this team to the next level. But a ton of running backs, a ton of receivers, and so that's where we'll start off today. And maybe before we talk about some of the new guys we're bringing in, let's look at some of the other transactions that have been made. So it's only been one offensive player that has been sort of outright released, and that's James Wilder Jr., which I'm sure you heard about if you've followed the Argos at all. James Wilder Jr., one of my favorite Argos, and it's sad to see him go, but it was obviously a relationship that had fractured somewhat. So James Wilder Jr. is no longer part of the roster. Guys that they re-signed, so Isaiah Cage, the offensive lineman that, remember back at the beginning of the season, he was the starter at left tackle. He only played a few games. I think it was the Calgary game. I want to say like the fourth or fifth game of the season against Calgary, he got injured. And then that was the last we saw of him all season. So we didn't really get to see a full year of Isaiah Cage, but he looked promising in the limited time that we saw him. So that's an exciting re-signing. And Rubens Joseph, of course, spent a lot of time on the practice roster this year. Another O-lineman, a guy that got into some games because of that injury to Cage. He came in and started, I want to say, 3 or 4 games in the middle of the season, ended up back in the practice roster. He's a guy that, you watch his film at UB, and I know he got a bunch of NFL looks too. He looks awesome. And I have to think a guy like that, Rubens Joseph, has the ability, certainly, to be a very good CFL lineman. And so that's just maybe a guy that is going to take a little bit of extra time. And a lot of people don't realize the O-line, the difference between the O-line in the U.S. versus Canada is huge. A lot of people think that when American football players come to Canada, the biggest transitions for them are things like the motion, the extra guy on the field width. And those things do factor in. Obviously, special teams, there's a lot of stuff to learn. But in terms of day-to-day skill and fundamentals and techniques, I think the biggest change is for guys on the O-line. That extra yard that you have in Canadian football takes a while to adjust to, going both ways. Canadians that end up going down south to play, suddenly not having that yard, it changes up the way you attack, it changes up the way you pass block, because that yard makes a tremendous amount of difference. And so it could be something as simple as, with Rubens Joseph, a guy that has all the physical skills, he's just having to get the sort of that extra bit of timing and the slight little tweaks in technique down. And maybe that's something that they've worked on throughout this season, and he worked on while he was part of the team this year. And they obviously feel good about him to bring him back as part of that offensive line group for the 2020 season. Chandler Worthy's another returning Argo wide receiver. We got to see a lot of Chandler Worthy in that last part of the season. He had some really exciting moments, that great game against Montreal. The only knock against Worthy that I had were some of those drops that we saw, just easy balls to catch right in his hands, and just lost that focus for a split second, dropped the ball. But he made all the tough catches, so it's not a question of ability. This is a guy that will catch in traffic. He's great down the sidelines, got great speed, wonderful after the catch. So I'm excited that the Argos brought him back too. So the new guys they brought in, well, why don't we focus on running back? Because I think that's where some of the most high-profile guys are. So the first one is Bishop Sankey, and remember they brought in Sankey right near the end of the season, and they have now added him to the 2020 roster, signing a contract with him. So Sankey has a history that you might remember. He was on one of my fantasy teams. It's the only reason that I remember him so well, because he had such high expectations in Tennessee. He was drafted in the second round, played for the Washington Huskies, drafted in the second round by Tennessee. He was explosive. He had 4.4 speed. He was 5'10", 202, a pretty tough back to bring down, really good in open space. And everyone expected him to kind of take over that job in Tennessee and be the guy going forward. But somewhere along the way, he lost a little bit of that explosiveness. And he's 27 now. And it'll be interesting to see because, of course, we haven't seen him do very much in a number of years now. And so I am interested to see when we get to preseason, when we get to camp, what does that explosion look like? Because if he has got back the explosion that he had, certainly when he was with Washington, but even in his first year and a bit with Tennessee, if he's still got that kind of explosion and speed, this is a guy that you can certainly rely on. He's a terrific running back. The other guy they brought in that all football fans have heard of is Carlos Williams, and especially around this area, a lot of Buffalo Bills fans around here. You'll remember Carlos Williams as having tied the NFL record for best start as a running back in terms of touchdowns. I think he scored a touchdown in his first 6 starts and looked like he was just going to explode into the NFL scene, but then he got into a little bit of trouble. He ended up getting suspended, I think 3 times for violating the league's substance abuse policy. He ended up having a bit of trouble with his weight, checked into camp the next year, overweight, ended up bouncing around the league a little bit. And he's 26 years old now. The last time he played football, he was playing at 230. He's 6'1". And so the question with Carlos Williams isn't about ability. He's fantastic. It's how serious is he at giving this a shot? How much does he want to be a Toronto Argonaut? How much does he want to be a CFL running back? If he fully commits to this, and if we get 100% of Carlos Williams, I think he will be the guy. I think he'll beat out all the other guys that we're going to talk about today, including Bishop Sankey and anyone that's currently on the roster. But the question is, how serious is he going to take this opportunity? The next guy we're going to talk about is Trayon Gray, who I don't know a lot about, but I was reading up on him and watching some of his highlights. So Trayon Gray, another running back, 6'1", 235. He's 24 years old. He was a Miami Hurricane, and I think the reason that we haven't heard a lot about him is that he was primarily used as a fullback in Miami. One of the interesting numbers that sort of jumped off the page for me was at his Miami Hurricanes Pro Day, where he ran a 4.37, and think of a guy that's 235 running 4.37. That obviously will raise some eyebrows. Now, it is at a Pro Day, not at the Combine, and those numbers sometimes are a little different. But yeah, certainly he's got speed. He's got a lot of athleticism. The Browns were using him a fair amount in preseason, second and third, fourth quarters of their preseason games. They were kind of using him as a goal line back situationally, and he is a big body, but he does have that burst to be able to get out wide. And so there's a highlight of him scoring a touchdown with Cleveland where they've stacked the box, goal line situation. They're at like the 5-yard line, and he busts it to the outside and just leaves everyone in the dust. And so he does have that explosion. There's no question. And for a big guy, that's a pretty interesting one. So I'd like to see what he has to offer, and I don't know what the Argos have planned for him. I don't see him as an every down back in the CFL. He just doesn't seem like that kind of guy. But again, it's not a guy I know a lot about, so that's probably not fair for me to judge based on the limited amount I've seen him and what little I know of him. But so Trayon Gray's one to keep in mind that'll be interesting. Kyle Lewis is another guy that they brought in who's sort of a running back receiver hybrid. Kyle Lewis out of Cal Poly. He's 5'11", 203. He originally was a running back. So he played running back in high school, was a very well-regarded recruit coming out of high school, and played running back at Cal Poly for his first couple seasons and then sort of transitioned. I think he realized that going forward, if he wanted to play football professionally, which obviously he did, that he was probably going to end up out wide. And so they tried him out as a slot back. He played out wide a little bit and just didn't see the same kind of success. Now, he's got all those intangibles that you want in a slot receiver, and great hands and runs routes really well. But for whatever reason, those numbers just didn't come through in his senior year at Cal Poly playing for the Mustangs. And so he didn't really hang on anywhere either. The Lions gave him some time, the Packers as well. But this is a guy, it'll be interesting to see what they want to do with him. He, again, at 203 is not huge, but again, you don't have to be as a CFL running back. 5'11", 203, certainly within the parameters of what you'd expect to see from a typical CFL runner. And he's got a really nice burst as well. He ran a 4.4 at his pro day. He's got good speed, good hands. I'm interested to see what this guy does as well, because I think he'll be a contributor somewhere. I think this guy, and you should see him too. He looks like a superhero. This guy is ripped. So he certainly draws a lot of attention. Just in the eye test, you see this guy line up, you're like, who the heck is that guy? He looks like Superman out there. So Kyle Lewis, those are the running backs that they've brought into this point. So recapping again, Bishop Sankey, who I'm very interested in seeing, Carlos Williams as well, depending on that level of commitment, and then Trayon Gray, Kyle Lewis. We'll see what they have to offer, but these are guys that we just don't know a lot about coming into the season. So that'll be fun in camp to see what those guys have to bring to the table. All right, let's take a look at the wide receivers that have been brought in so far. So the first guy I want to talk about is Nyquan Murray. I'm really excited about Nyquan Murray. He's out of Florida State, 5'10", 193, 22 years old. So he was undrafted, had a cup of coffee with the Seahawks, didn't stick with them, and I'm not really sure why. When you look at his film, it looks pretty good. He's a really good route runner. He's not blazing fast, and maybe that was what kept him off an NFL roster, but he's a shifty runner. He's got really good lateral speed, very good explosiveness. When you watch his tape from Florida State, they feature him in a lot of quick hitches, slants, drags, option routes. They try and get him in open space, and that's a guy that has CFL success written all over him. With the amount of space that is going to be out there for him, he's going to love playing in the CFL. And all of those concepts that I just talked about, all those routes that I just talked about, those are things that you see, every other play in the CFL. And he'll be well used with all the underneath stuff, with all the quick stuff, Z-Quicks and everything else. And Nyquan Murray will excel. I'm feel very confident that, again, if you get full effort from Nyquan Murray, and there's no reason to think you won't, then I think he's going to be an extremely good CFL player. So that's a guy I'm really excited about. Another guy I'm excited about is Joel Blumenthal. So he is listed as a receiver quarterback, but I think we're just looking at him here as a wide receiver. The reason he's listed as a receiver quarterback is that he started as a quarterback. He played quarterback in high school, played quarterback in JUCO as well, and then ended up at Northwestern State, transferred to Southwestern Oklahoma State. And somewhere along the way, he started to realize that if he wanted to get to the next level, and he's a fantastic athlete, and he started probably thinking, I'm going to have to probably add something to my game. And so when he was at Southwestern Oklahoma State, he started getting reps as a receiver. And he turned out to be a really good receiver. But the funny thing is where he got noticed. So again, not a ton of NFL scouts hanging out at Southwestern Oklahoma State and Northwestern State watching NFL prospects, but there were a lot of scouts at Kyler Murray's pro day. And so for Kyler Murray's pro day at Oklahoma, they ended up bringing in Blumenthal to run some routes. And scouts watching Kyler Murray that day see this guy and they're like, who the heck is this guy who doesn't drop a single ball, runs a 4.5 at that pro day? And he ends up getting invited to Kansas City's rookie camp. Doesn't hang on with the Chiefs, but he has done nothing but work on his game as a receiver since then. So he's had some injury issues along the way, nothing that really concerns me. Those tended to be shoulder issues and stuff that would have affected him as a quarterback. But I love this guy's work ethic. This is a guy that has sort of modeled himself after the Julian Edelman sort of model. He's a little bigger than Edelman. He's 6'1", 203, but he has modeled his game after him, using that sort of, the quickness, the intelligence, and that's something that this guy brings to the table. Work ethic off the charts. So That's a guy I'm really excited about. Joel Blumenthal, wherever you can find a place for him, just reading up on this guy, this is somebody that I want on my team. And you just got to find a spot for him somewhere, whether he's just a special teams contributor and that's it, or he's actually contributing on the offensive side of the ball. There's going to be space for him. This is a guy you want in your locker room. This is a guy you want out of practice. Dres Anderson, another receiver that's kind of interesting. So Dres Anderson, son of Flipper Anderson, some of you will know. So Dres Anderson, 6'1", 189. He's 27, a little older. He's out of Utah. Bounced around the NFL on a number of different practice squads, but he had some knee issues that sort of kept him off the field. He could look great. You watch some of his tape, he looks awesome, but there are also frustrating moments as well. So what I like is that he plays faster and bigger than he measures. He's not particularly elusive. I don't know what his top-end speed is like, but he certainly plays fast. His game speed looks good, but he mixes in those frustrating drops, which we see from so many receivers, where the difficult ones they catch, the highlight ones they catch, and then sometimes it'll just hit him right in the hands and he drops it, loses that concentration. And that was something that plagued him a little bit as he bounced around the NFL. But certainly a guy to be excited about. He's got that pedigree. Flipper Anderson was awesome. And Dres has that same sort of flash and excitement and a tendency to make those big plays. So he's a guy that'll be really fun to watch. And we'll see what he can produce in camp. Quidarius Smith is the next guy I want to talk about. Another guy I'm really excited about. Quidarius Smith, the smallest of all the guys to bring in. He's 5'9", 170. 25-year-old, played at Akron. He's from Orlando. He's got a really interesting backstory. He was in and out of foster care growing up. Actually spent some time living with a number of different families who were looking after him and really loved him and took care of him and just wanted to keep him in school. And he ended up going to Akron. A track star, and like legitimate track star, like actually ran track well, as opposed to a 4.3 and a 4.4, depending on who you listen to at the Akron Pro Day. He went undrafted, and probably because of his size, the NFL is just a little bit more particular. A guy weighing 170, he doesn't check quite as many boxes in terms of the physical stuff that he brings for the NFL. I think this guy can be an amazing CFL player. I love his speed. You see him mostly when you look at his highlights. He's mostly running go routes on the outside, but this is a guy that will also run across the middle of the field. I love him running digs and drags, and I think again there's so much space for him. Just sort of like we talked about earlier with Naquan Murray. This is another guy that I think is just made for the CFL, and I think he's going to do some wonderful things. So I'm excited to see that speed add to the lineup. And what you started to notice here as we talk about different guys is that they're sort of bringing in two of every type of receiver, it seems like. So we got two speed guys, two possession guys, and obviously that's a good strategy. And that way, if one doesn't pan out, obviously we can't keep all these guys. They're going to be guys that we're bringing back from the current team. You can't keep everyone that you're bringing in. When you look at the combination of, guys with moves, guys with flat out speed, and then we're getting to our last few guys who are sort of more possession oriented guys. So Isaac Zico's the next guy that we're going to talk about. 6'1", 200, 23-year-old out of Purdue. He was undrafted, bounced around like a lot of these other guys, Tennessee, Arizona, didn't stick. Really good outside receiver. He's a bit of a fade machine. Pretty much every route that he was asked to run at Purdue was, Purdue doesn't exactly run the sort of air raid offense that you see a lot of other teams running. But yeah, no, he's great at it. And this is a guy that runs a really good fade route. He uses his size really well. He bodies out. He doesn't have consistent hands, but this is a big game producer. This is, a guy that every time Purdue went up against somebody that was expected to annihilate them, he came up with a really big game. Zico would produce and was responsible for a few upsets during his senior year. So that's a guy that I think certainly belongs on that big time stage, and has that skill set for that one specific thing, but we don't really know what he has to offer in terms of the other things he can do because we really didn't see it because he just didn't have that opportunity at Purdue. So that's another guy that is going to be interesting to see in preseason and in camp to see what else he can bring us. Brendan Shepard and Kent Shelby are the next two guys I'm going to talk about, the last two receivers. And these guys are really similar. When I was watching their tapes, they reminded me of each other, and yet they don't at the same time. And I don't know, I'm not being very clear on that. Let me sort of go through them individually, and we'll sort of talk about what they both do well and some of the concerns that they each might have. So Brendan Shepard first, 6'1", 195, 25 years old. He's an Oklahoma State guy, undrafted. Looks really big on film. I don't know how that is. With some guys, it's just like that. Certain guys on film, like you swear they're really fast, and then you look at their times and they're not, or you swear that they're not fast and you look at their times and they are. And you see that a little bit with size as well. Like 6'1", he's not a small receiver, but he looks like he's 6'4" when he's playing some of his Oklahoma State stuff. He looks massive. What I love about him is how quickly he picks up the ball in the air. As soon as it leaves the quarterback's hand, he knows exactly where it's going to go, and he uses his body to his advantage to be able to box out, to be able to create space. He's really good at leaving space for himself on the sideline and sort of pinning the corner to the inside and then adjusting at that last minute to pick up the ball. A lot of body catches. That would, I guess, be one of the concerns. He's not elusive or agile. Doesn't have speed isn't his thing, but he's a big guy. Uses his size really well, and that's something that reminds me a little bit of Smith. We saw him used really effectively this season, and this is a guy that sort of falls in that same mold. Kent Shelby, similar, McNeese State. He was undrafted, similar size, a little taller, 6'2", 208, slightly bigger guy, 24 years old. He had a bit of a run with the Chargers. Not a fast guy. He ran 4.6 at his pro day, but he's a guy that looks a little faster on film. And some of the stuff I was reading about him, the coaches were saying where he's one of those guys with good game speed, where he just finds another gear when he's after a ball. He's one of the best receivers in McNeese State's history. Now, I know, again, McNeese State might be a school you don't know a lot about, but it's a history that goes back a ways. Like, this is a school that's been around for like 80 years. So to be one of the best receivers in McNeese State's football history is something. Another guy with a lot of body catches, and that's something that we'd like to see him get a little bit away from. He's a really patient runner. Now, you didn't see with McNeese State, he didn't run a ton of jailbreak and slip screens and things like that. And I think he's really well suited to that, because when you watch him, they featured him on a number of like end arounds and quick screens to the outside. But whenever he came back to the middle, he's a really patient runner. A little upright, but he waits for his blocks to set up in front of him. He patiently navigates his way, and then when he sees a little opening, bursts through it. He's a guy that I would love to see, like a lot of these guys, with that extra space that we've got in the CFL. And, routes and concepts that are designed specifically for him. I think Ken Shelby will be a pretty exciting guy to watch. He frustrates me a little bit. This is something that just as a pet peeve of mine, I hate when guys carry the ball out to the side, out wide. You see a lot of it now in NCAA. You see a lot of it in the NFL. We don't see a ton of it in the CFL. Guys tend to be, I think the CFL coaches maybe hammer them a little bit more in terms of fundamentals with keeping the ball high and tight. But this is a guy that you're just waiting. But he doesn't put the ball on the ground. He's not a guy that fumbles. But it just, when you see him run, you're waiting for somebody to get a piece of that ball. So that's something that will surely drive me crazy, because it always does. But yeah, he's another guy to be excited about. So that's the receiver group that we're bringing in. We'll turn our attention now to the offensive line. The Argos bringing in 2 offensive linemen in addition to Joseph and Cage that we already talked about. So the first guy is Dontavius Blair. He's going to be pretty interesting. So I keep saying that with every guy that we brought in. I'm really legitimately fascinated by the people they've brought in at every position, and the defensive guys as well. And we'll talk about that on our next podcast. But there's some really interesting guys. Camp is going to be a lot of fun. So Dontavius Blair, 6'7", 294. He's 26 years old. He spent a couple seasons at JUCO, Garden City. Some of you know a little bit about that from Last Chance U and the rivalry that Independence had with Garden City. So he spent a couple seasons at Garden City. He had a little bit of a strange journey. He's 26 years old, but hasn't been sitting around for a long time. And it's because he spent those 2 seasons at JUCO. He ended up going to Tennessee for the 2014 season. He had a full ride at Tennessee. And the way they were talking about him when he was coming in 2013 was they were expecting him to be a starter. So he was sort of being penciled in preseason as, this is one of the guys, even as a rookie coming in, that was going to be penciled in as a starter on the offensive line. But that didn't happen. He actually ended up getting redshirted for that entire season. So 2015 comes around, and now expectations are, okay, let's see Blair. He's going to come in and start now. He's ready. And he spent the whole season backing up at right tackle. And again, the season goes by. He got into a few games, but largely he was used as a backup. And now coming into the 2016 season, everyone was penciling him in as a starter. But then at the last minute, he ends up transferring to University of West Alabama. And he was an All-American there, did great, looks awesome in the season that he had. The numbers that they put up in the run game, the numbers they put up passing the ball, it was an amazing offense. And not in small part because of him and some of the things that he was able to do from the left tackle spot. But when you watch his film, there's still something that looks very raw about him. He's a big guy. He looks like he belongs as a tackle. He's extremely athletic. He's got a great reach. But there's just something about when you watch his West Alabama film, things like, checking back to see where the ball is mid-run play, and stuff that you just typically don't see from a tackle that's played that much football, that they're just conditioned to. You keep blocking to the whistle, keep blocking to the whistle. And I don't know if it's just that he dominated his opposition so thoroughly, because he did. He's, in terms of his actual numbers, like sacks allowed, pressures allowed, this is a guy that was not letting anyone near his quarterback and was creating a lot of space for his running backs. But he, just has this sort of look about him when you watch him play, where some of the fundamentals just don't seem there. Now, it didn't matter. And so the question will be, well, what is that going to look like now in the CFL? On the CFL field, what's that going to look like against professional opposition when you're, having to go up against a guy that is going to come at you with everything he has every play and is just as talented an athlete as you are? And so I'm interested to see how he looks in this setting. But there's reason to be very optimistic with him because, like I said before, this is a guy that he got it done at West Alabama. And obviously he's got all those things, all those intangibles. So can he put it all together now? Can he make it work? And hopefully he can, because again, he's got everything going for him. The last guy we're going to talk about today, Eric Starzala from Guelph. So a Canadian guy. He's 6'5", 315, 23 years old. He was a Jacob Hespler Hawk, high school football in Cambridge. He also played for the Cambridge Lions, OVFL, ended up going to Guelph. 5-year man, I think, at Guelph. He's massive. He looks like a bear, partly because he's got this monster beard and the long hair as well, but he actually is built like a bear. I do not know how this guy gets a suit on because, he's just a massive individual. Super strong, very quick for his size. He's played a lot of football. And I think, like I was saying earlier, with some of the problems that Americans have coming in, this is an advantage that Eric's going to have playing in the CFL, is that he's only played Canadian football. A guy going from Canadian OVFL to Canadian high school to Canadian university. It's a big advantage. I'm telling you, it's a big advantage. I know there are other reasons that we see so many Canadians put at offensive line, but one of those reasons is because of that yard. It makes such a big difference. And having played as much football as he has in Canada is going to give him an advantage over all the rest of the American guys that he's going to be going up against. So I'm excited to see him. He's going to be we know exactly what he is. And he's a guy that, just having watched him over the last couple of years playing with Guelph, playing in some really high-profile games too, I know what he is. I know exactly what he's going to look like in an Argos uniform playing for the Argos. And he's a guy that you can depend on. And so I'm really excited to bring him in as well. He'll get out there. He'll compete. He'll give you everything he has on every play. And I think of all the guys we brought in, he may be the least exciting of all the names we've talked about, but I think there's something to be said for that known quantity. I love that this is a guy we brought in to the team, and because he's going to bring you positive stuff, and he's going to make the team better. So, yes, less exciting, but I'll trade that for knowing what you've got in him, and he'll be a great addition to the Toronto Argonauts for 2020. So that'll do it for all our offensive players. Now, you notice that we haven't talked about a quarterback, and this is obviously a position that will have to be addressed at some point, and I'm sure we'll have an entire podcast dedicated to that when it does, but I think we're going to be talking about that in February. But for now, there is no noise on the quarterback front. It's running backs, receivers, O-linemen, and join us next time. We'll talk about the defensive side of the ball, the additions that have been made there, and there's some additions on the defensive side of the ball that are just as exciting as some of these awesome pieces that have been added on offense. Until next time, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and tell all your friends about us. You can also check out our website, xsandargos.com. I'm Ben Grant. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.